Hi, everyone. It's great to have an opportunity to speak to you today. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion afterwards. Many of you know me already. My name is Present. I've been working with Serge Ravet since 2004 on e-portfolios, and certainly since 2011 on open badges when we introduced them to EPIC at 2012, and they've been growing like crazy ever since. So we're very excited to bring you today a new innovation for open badges and alignment. But before we get into that, let me introduce Stephen Forth from IBICA, who has helped us introduce this innovation. Stephen?
Thank you very much, Don. I'm delighted to be here and have an opportunity to both speak with you and, more importantly, to listen to you and share ideas about how we can bring together this world of skills and competency models and micro-certifications and badges, because this is what we can really do to enable and open up human potential over the coming decade.
So we call this initiative Go Frameworks. And it's a way of using the alignment field in the open badge format to connect people with opportunities, as Stephen was saying. My company is Learning Agents. We run an open badge service in Canada called CanCred, and essentially it's the open badge factory technology on Canadian servers for Canadians. For this initiative, we're partnered with IBICA, as I said, with Stephen, and what we're going to do now is just sort of frame the idea for you first, talk about some elements that we're putting together to start offering this, and then showing how it can work. So this is the theme is about skills, and that's why many people are talking about badges. There are a number of reasons for this. We have skill shortages, we have demographics that are not well addressed in the population, and we have old ways of doing things that aren't so effective today. And what we're talking about is skills, yes, technical skills using ICT, etc., but often it's human skills that are most important. And this particular skill is very important, this notion of continuing to learn and knowing how to learn. So one of the things I thought I might do is just talk about open badges that I mentioned were invented in 2011. For Serge and myself, we very quickly realized that they were a solution to some of the problems around e-portfolios, because they were modular, they were more accessible, and they were, in a sense, more holistic. Open badges were invented as a subset of digital badges in general, so just the idea of having stickers on a website to motivate you through working a website. Somewhere along the way, post-secondary, higher education started getting interested in it as a way of modularizing large diplomas, which has good and bad aspects to it. So they saw it as a way of taking digital credentials forward, and digital credentials themselves are a way of improving on the old paper credentials. So this is essentially a spectrum of formality that we're looking at. And technologically, we have open badges and other micro-credentials and open badges both having image and data so that they're documents. Maybe you have documents that have no images, so they would not be open badges. Maybe you still have digital badges that have no data, so it's just gamification on a website. And you still have some old credentials that are just on paper. Okay, so that's the spectrum. The point being, for micro-credentials, higher education is very interested in making the point that there should be some form of assessment for the credential. But over on the more non-formal, informal side, assessment may not be needed. Maybe it's just simply recognition. So that's your spectrum. Formal, non-formal, meaning typically not for credit, and then informal, which can be just more regular, relaxed context, more life-wide. And on the left, you would have more summative, saying, did this person do this thing? Do we have evidence of that? Versus, you're doing well, you can go further. And then on the left, you have many institutions being concerned about whether they can prove that this was done in an audit. But over on the right, you have more, it's a conversation with the individual talking about how well they're doing and how much further they can go. So the point we're making with this is that today with higher education, it's often being pulled from its original source by Mozilla to become more formal, and that's potentially losing a lot of the value from that. So hopefully today, the innovation we're talking about today can improve that. So that's essentially what we're saying, is that structured learning is really a small piece of the amount of life-wide learning we do in general. So we often learn from other people who show us how to do things, who give us feedback, who encourage us to go further. But often we're even alone, and we're just trying to make things happen and survive in our job and make that deliverable. So structured learning, which gets a lot of the attention, is typically only 10% of our lives. And these are just notional proportions. 20% often people helping us, and that idea of social learning. 70%, as much as 70%, would be us working alone and developing by ourselves. So formal and non-formal structured learning around 10%, and all of this is informal. The issue is all the attention for higher education is in this notion of formal and non-formal assessment and recognition. So hopefully today we can advance some ideas that will help the formal, non-formal and informal ways of being recognized. So this diagram is going to be familiar to many. A way of summarizing what I've just been saying is that we're pushing for the upper right quadrant. More the emergent, more informal, and more about the person. So, and that's really, it's about the person. It's about people are not just some of their skills, they're actually walking, talking people with passions, with goals. And we have things that we love, things that we're good at, things that we can be paid for, and things that the world needs. And if we try and put those together in this ikigai diagram, maybe what the world needs is something we can be paid for, and we have an occupation, but maybe we're not so good at it, so it's maybe a little precarious. Maybe we're good at it and we can be paid for it, but maybe it doesn't have a lot of meaning for us. Now maybe we love it, we're good at it, but maybe the world doesn't really need it, so we maybe feel just a little useless. Maybe we love it and the world needs it, but we have trouble getting a loan to buy an apartment. So what we're pushing for is this notion of ikigai. And I think if we reflect about ourselves in our lives, in our various occupations and roles, we have moved around in this circle, always trying to find the center. And that's what we're trying to help people do with open badges. So another element here, UNESCO is very much about lifelong learning and recognition. Some of you may remember at the previous EPIC, Daniel Baril made a presentation about this with the Institute of Lifelong Learning, talking about the holistic character of lifelong learning, the fact that there should be better collaboration around it, that vulnerable groups need to be at the center, that lifelong learning really is a common good and should be promoted in that way, and that we want to provide equity for people, the underserved populations. And we want to get away from this sequence of learning that goes up to from K to 20 or whatever and then cuts off, and think about them as lifelong learning institutions working with other groups in society. Think about the collective dimension, again, that notion of holistic, and then think in terms of regions. So I don't have to talk to this audience in France about learning cities and territoire apprenant. And then just to think about workplace learning as something as more than courses, maybe learning in flow, things like that. And then lifelong learning, not just as a common good, but as a human right. which could get you into a lot of lawyers, but maybe the common good is the safer part. So what we're trying to develop, what we're trying to foster in people is this way of bringing together their human skills, which are inside themselves and are in their social relations, and bring them together with technical expertise. So it's often called the T-shaped student. And the notion here is that you end up having to reinvent yourselves through your life. They talk here about a 100-year work life. That sounds a little scary to me. But essentially, you have to keep on refreshing your technical skills, and you're doing it in the context. I think when I make a new version of this diagram, I will make the yellow bar go more wide as you go to the right, because your transversal, your horizontal, your human skills have to deepen over your life as you reinvent yourself in your skills. And it's not just a T, these things interoperate a lot. So you have the human skills, you have the specialty skills. They're essentially coming together and mixing together. And again, it's that holistic notion. And the goal, of course, is to have people who are motivated, are happy, and are productive in their lives. And everyone does better. So in other words, again, I'm going back to Brian Mather's wonderful diagrams. It's not just about having to take a course and get assessed on that course. It's about learning and being driven to learn, driven by passion, driven by goals, and then being recognized for that because you want the best possible version of yourself. And this is essentially the ideal for badges to support that. You do things, you get recognized for them, and they lead to new opportunities for you. So essentially, you're trying to map your future. So it's, I guess, not so much a coincidence that mini maps that Eden, who's with us here today, is helping, working with OBF to develop mini maps for Open Badge Passport. So this notion of mapping is a really powerful one, and I've been learning a lot about it recently. And it relates to what's called knowledge graphs. It's a somewhat scary notion that LinkedIn and Google and Facebook have knowledge graphs about us. But what if we had control of those? And what if we could point out connections between people that are useful, and connections between people and their goals and people and their skills? So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about here. This RDF it's a technical term, but it's basically talking about making relationships between between people and between resources, which can be many things. If you think in terms of biodiversity, that's just a view of talking about the knowledge map of biodiversity. If you're talking about a food system in South Africa, it can get very complex. But again, it's essentially mapping relationships and then applying analysis to that to talk about relationships. And Stephen will be talking about that a bit later. So if we apply this notion to skills and learning, this simple diagram from Coursera can map relationships between learners, where they want to go with their careers, and how they're going to get there. And you can, from those simple relationships, you can build up rather very complex maps that can talk about populations as a whole. These could be regions, these could be sectors, and as you see here, there can be different kinds of skills that are being mapped, and you start looking at the relative relationships between them. Don't worry too much about the complexity here. It's just to make the point that complex maps can be made from simple relationships. So the other element that was really useful for us in developing Go frameworks is we're grateful to Margarita Basigalupo in the European Commission, JRC, talking about Entrecomp. She's been working with a team to develop Entrecomp and ways of engaging with Entrecomp, which is that competency framework for entrepreneur skills. And they talk about it as a reference framework. It's not meant to be normative. It's not like you can only be an entrepreneur if you've checked off these things. It's a way of describing entrepreneurs in different ways, almost as if you would use Lego. So I I don't have to define the word bricolé for a French audience. This is more for a North American audience. But I think that notion is a powerful one. Basically, it's a palette of things, and it's, again, just thinking about that star sky, ways of developing new realities using available resources that you may or may not want to map to. So the other element here, and Stephen, I encourage you to chime in here and just talk about your open competency model notion and where that came from and how that might, how possibly that might be attractive for Go frameworks as an element.
So thank you, Don. And as Don said, the open competency models on Go frameworks are both an example of the open skills network at work. They will feed into and draw from this larger network so that we create a dynamic system where new skills are constantly becoming visible and where we get a better and better understanding of how these skills can be used and how they connect to other skills. We have found, though, that skills by themselves are not enough, and that one also needs to have competency models that organize the skills for individuals, for teams, and for organizations, so that new capabilities that combine multiple skills can be introduced for people and for organizations.
Great, thanks, Stephen. So we're going to shift gears here. I think we've framed it fairly well for you. Just to review that we want to apply this to open badges. Many people here are familiar with this notion of open badge factory on the left, issuing badges to open badge passport and hopefully making differences in the lives of the people who earn the badges. Just to make the point that in Canada, we have the same technology on different servers for Canada. So I'm going to show you now in the context of CanCred, and possibly in the future, Open Badge Factory will have this also. So the Open Badge standard, Open Badges, as we know, are documents. They're structured documents. They have fields that must be there. They have fields that can be there. So one of the so-called optional fields is the alignment field in the Open Badge standard. And this is, for example, where you connect to ESCO. I'm not sure how many people connect to ESCO, but that one is there. It's a way of connecting to an external framework to help map your badge to something, whether it be a skill or competence or occupation. You also have other ones. This is an example of several frameworks that exist in Canada, that exist in the U.S. That are supported by the U.S. Department of Labor. Here in Canada, we have the Ontario Essential Employability Skills that all colleges must map their programs to. So they're interested in mapping their badges to, and those are essentially transversal skills. So the alignment field, this is what comes out of the box, came out of the box before ESCO, is, you say what it is, you give a link, and then maybe you describe it. And I was originally pointing to this Government of Ontario website that talked about the essential skills, and that was it. There was no way of talking about numeracy in particular, for example. So we have ESCO that comes along in the European context, and you're able to identify many, many, many skills. It's a monster database, but it's difficult to use, and it's difficult to know whether you've got everything. So I sometimes say, meh, whether how many people do not use it because it's a little more difficult to use. So we thought there should be alternatives that were more attuned to the community, frameworks that they would be interested in using that were easier to use and more immediately, obviously relevant to the needs of the community. So that was the notion behind Go frameworks. We got some provincial government funding in partnership with St. Lawrence College. You'll notice I'm using the mapping notion here. St. Lawrence College partnered with us. This enabled Concrete Factory to connect to an IBICA talent server that had a competency model frameworks on it, so we could align our badges to skills and other models. We're an instance of Open Badge Factory. The Go Frameworks is an instance of IBICA Talent, so the IBICA team developed an API as part of the project. An API means just a way of connecting, a model for connecting servers, a protocol for connecting servers, and then the development team at OBF developed an integration using that API, and that enables what we're talking to you today about. So this is a little sort of technical story behind how this came together today. So what we have now is a way of connecting from within Concrete Factory to Go Frameworks as an alternative to ESCO, and we can connect to frameworks like these and other ones that would be, as Stephen mentioned, open and quality-based. We'll talk a little bit more about that. That enables us to issue badges that are better described to individuals and hopefully lead to good things for them. So just move on here. So let's just show this in action. And again, these are just snapshots I can show live on the day if you're interested. But essentially, instead of that single web page, now we can drill down into the framework and say, I want to talk about visual literacy with this badge, not just the entire framework. In the same way, you can actually manage your framework. So we're starting out with a limited number of public frameworks on the Go Frameworks notion. If you have a pro-level factory account, the admin can decide which frameworks to make available to badge creators in the same way that, for example, that the admin can decide which languages may be available for making a badge. So these are different frameworks that are available, and then the badge creator is able to use that and say, okay, I'm going to talk to advanced manufacturing, and I'm going to drill down into that framework. So instead of picking from ESCO, they're picking from Go Frameworks. And again, Stephen's mentioned this. These are public frameworks, but we are putting in place options for people who want more private access to that and are willing to pay for that kind of private or custom access. So beyond skills, as we know, people are not just the sum of their skills. So we have mapped to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So you're able to say that we want to map to target 4.4, which is to substantially increase the number of youth and adults who have relevant skills, including technical vocational skills, which I think would be a common goal for many people who are looking at this today. Just to say that we can talk about skills, we can talk about goals, we can talk about standards, domains of knowledge. So the ISKED domain of subject domains that are published by the UN. That's a possible framework for us to look at. And also regions and geographies. So essentially what we have here is a way of mapping to skills that could be mapped in the future. EntreComp is one that we're looking seriously at adding very soon. We can also talk in terms of goals and themes and principles, which can include, as I mentioned, the ISKED in the UNESCO, but also things like we want our micro-credentials to be aligned to this particular framework where they're all assessed. Well, okay, you can map yours to that, and other people can map the same. Possibly in France, it may be good to say that our badges support the principles of VAE. If that is feasible to do, we're happy to look at that as well. Initially for Concrete Factory, as I mentioned, Open Badge Factory is interested in looking at that and providing it to its clients. Other platforms are possible, and it's all about people, not just individuals, but also teams of people, organizations, communities, and then regions. I've got one big region there that's going to be familiar to many, but it could be smaller regions as well. So, Stephen, I'm going to pass over to you now to go into more detail about these models and how they map to badges.
Great. So, as Don has been showing, what we've done with the Open Badge Factory and CanCred is provide much more granular ways of aligning badges and micro-credentials with competency models. There's a huge amount of work going on these days in the competency model world. It's very active. There are new standards being developed. There are many new competency models being introduced. And it's going to be critical, I believe, to connect this into the world of badges and micro-credentials. And this is a two-way relationship. So badges can appear on profiles. Badges can connect to learning resources, badges can connect to skills, badges themselves are a form of credential, but one can also flip this over, and all of these things that are going from left to right can also go from right to left, so that badges appearing on profiles enrich the sorts of skill profiles that people are increasingly learning within not just their learning systems, but also in their operations and their project management systems. Learning resources can come from badges to competency management systems. Badges and micro-credentials are a rich source of information about different skills, what skills a person has, but also how skills are all connected together. And one can also draw from credentials information about the skills that are required to perform in a specific area. Competency models can be designed in many different ways. What you are seeing on this slide is the default approach that IBCA takes to open competency models. Let's look at how this works in the wild, out in the real world. So it's very important when one is talking about skills and competencies to include an understanding of assessment. And there are many different ways that one can assess a person's expertise in a skill. Perhaps the most important is to provide evidence from the work they are doing. But one can also use examinations, provide external certifications, have experts assess an individual on their skills. Managers assess. Very important is peer assessment. Often the people that we work with have a better understanding of our skills than we do ourselves, or that our managers do, but self-assessment is also part of this. And the system that Go Frameworks is built on can bring in all of these different forms of evidence in order to infer a level of expertise. And it not only looks at the level of expertise, it also makes a judgment as to how confident we should be about that assessment. It's not just this, though. Because our peers and the people we work with often have a better understanding of our own skills, we allow people to suggest skills to each other and create a bit of a gift economy around skills. And then people can see how those skills are developing over time. And this notion of progression is critically important.
So we have these themes recurring that I think are very friendly to the way Open Badge Factory technology has been advancing. We can have things like selfie badges where people would self-assess themselves. We can have selfie badges that peers can deliver to each other. We can start adding evidence after we are issued a badge and get endorsed for that, and then we maybe, and even now, get that reassessed or reevaluated. And possibly we can add meaning to that. This isn't in place yet, but maybe post-facto alignment, why not? And then the idea of suggesting skills and badges, etc. When Eric was demonstrating mini-maps, that's the kind of thing he was talking about. Is right now you can deliberately suggest badges to people. Maybe, well, there are ways of automating that and making it more organic rather than decided by a single person for another person or group of people. So we see all of this as coming together over time, and we're very excited by the possibilities of it. And so where we're at right now is we're just about to launch a website. It's very, very close to being launched, isn't it, Stephen? And we want to develop this minimum viable product in the community as we continue to improve it. We want to make it easier for people to view and contribute frameworks, and develop a more complex governance model where we have very clear ideas on the kinds of frameworks that are acceptable, ways that people can use the frameworks, and ways that people can sort of customize their own access to the entire system using building on a base of public and open. We are interested in looking at open frameworks, other open frameworks over time. Obviously based on the Creative Commons. Stephen, this is an element that Stephen added, this idea of IEEE recommended practices. We want to host frameworks that are well formed, and so we don't have a ton of junk that people are dealing with in terms of public frameworks. Stephen, can you talk about the IEEE recommended practices for a bit?
Yes. So this is a standard that a fairly large group of people from Asia, North America, and Europe have been working on, so that there will be a place where we can go to say, this is what a good competency definition is. This is how competency definitions and skills and behaviors can be built together into frameworks. These are all the different places where the frameworks and competency definitions can align with or be integrated with other systems. And then what are the governance models that need to be in place as these frameworks evolve and change over time? So this standard is just about complete, and we hope to have the first formal approved version in the fall of this year.
So this basically brings us to the end of our presentation. We're looking forward very much to the questions that may come from the audience, and certainly comments that can help us improve this model that we're developing. But I would just like to say thanks very much for your attention in this, and thanks very much to Eden and Muriel for providing us the opportunity of sharing it with you.
Indeed. Thank you very much, everyone, and let's have a rigorous and robust conversation.